Okay, well done. Hopefully you enjoyed that run, or at least if you didn't enjoy it, you feel a sense of accomplishment. But yeah, well done. Okay, right, so I'm just going to take you through a set of stretches that you can use after every single session. So when you're doing stretches, particularly for lower body exercise stretching, just try and work your way up. So we're going to start with a calf stretch. So going on basically into the press up position, and then you're just going to shift your weight back and your hands until you can get your heel on the floor on one leg. Opposite leg you can bend and just kind of use for balance, but you want that heel on the floor, and then you can shift your body weight a little bit forwards and you'll get a more intense stretch on that calf. Okay, so just going to hold this for about 10 seconds. Just remember, if you want to improve kind of mobility around the joint, then you want to hold the stretch upwards to about a minute. Okay, and if you do that regularly, eventually you'll start to encourage a bit of mobility to that joint. Okay, so on to the other side, another 10 seconds on this side. So this is stretching what's called your gastrocnemius, which is kind of like the larger superficial calf muscle. And then in a few seconds time, we're going to stretch the soleus. And so to do that, you're going to keep your knee bent, so shimmy back a little bit more, but again get that heel on the floor, and just think about pushing your knee into the ground, and you'll feel the stretch kind of a little bit lower down and into your Achilles. So your soleus kicks in whenever your knee's bent, so obviously when you're running up and downhill it gets activated. Okay, and on to the other side, so keeping that knee bent to about sort of 30 degrees, I say, or something like that, but keeping the heel on the ground, and you'll feel quite a nice intense stretch down the base of your calf. Okay, and then switching out of that one, and stretch the hamstrings. So leg out straight in front of you, and then if you can, put your hands on the floor or have something to the side so that you can kind of just, the key thing is about dropping your chest. Okay, so you're closing the angle between your quad and your stomach basically. But if you can, get your hands either side and just really lean into it, and you'll feel a nice intense stretch down the back of your hamstring. Okay, swapping over onto the other side. So again, just use a ledge or whatever to kind of lever into it, and then once you're set, try and get your hands on the ground if you can. If you're not able to get your hands on the ground at all, then I would suggest that your hamstrings are extremely tight and you need to work on that. Okay, so lots of stretching. Whenever you're stretching, make sure you're nice and warm. Okay, so ideally straight after the session, swapping around again this time. We're going to bend our knee, so this is going to hit higher up into your hamstring. Okay, as I was saying, you want to stretch when you're warm, so ideally after a session, or if you want to stretch more regularly than that, you can stretch after a nice hot shower or a bath. The muscles just need to have warmth and elasticity. Okay, back onto the other side. So you should feel this stretch right at kind of the top of your hamstring. Okay. Okay, and then just going to sit back onto the floor. I'm going to stretch out our glutes. Okay, so the way we can do this is my favourite glute stretch. So you're going to take one knee over the top of the other, so that the knee kind of sits in the crux behind the knee. And then this is a bit of a thinker. So I've taken my right knee over my left. So with my left hand, I'm going to try and grab my right ankle, and then with my right hand, I'm going to grab my left ankle. You're going to lie back, and you're just going to pull your knees into your chest, and you should feel this kind of across the meat of your glute muscle. Okay, I'm going to swap the legs over. So stretch the glute on the other side. Okay, good. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is you lie back, careful with your head, you don't just fall back into something. So what I'm going to do now is going into kind of like a crucifix position. You draw one knee up to 90 degrees, get my opposite hand and just pull the knee over and across until the foot touches the ground. Try and keep the opposite shoulder on the floor, and you should feel a nice stretch kind of around the back of your hip. Okay. And now onto the other side. Draw the knee up, bring it across. Try and keep both shoulders on the ground. If you get a little bit of clicking, don't worry, it's just kind of release of air pockets. It shouldn't hurt though, basically. It should be a satisfying click. Okay, good. So that's kind of like your glutes and your hips loosened off. Now we're just going to come onto our knees, all right, and you're just going to sit back onto your heels, laces down, okay. And this does two things. Firstly, hopefully you're getting a little bit of a stretch across the front of your quads. Also, you should be stretching out the front of your ankles and stretching out a muscle called your tibialis anterior. Okay, so this is a great one for introducing a little bit of flexibility to your ankles. So often good sort of experienced runners that have very stable ankles, but they're not very flexible. And if you do triathlon, that can be a bit of a hindrance when it comes to swimming. Okay, so this is a good one to killing two birds with one stone. And then what you're going to do, this next one is actually a yoga pose. It's called Pigeon. Okay, it's quite a complicated one, so just follow with me. So you're going into your press up position. Okay, my right foot comes forwards until kind of my knee is close to my elbow. Then the right foot is going to move directly across to the opposite side. I drop the knee down, and this is where you need to be careful, okay? If you shouldn't be forcing anything or really hurting yourself. But once in this position where I've kind of got my leg sort of diagonally across here, I slide the back foot back until my knee is on the ground. Okay, and then basically you should feel a nice stretch around the outside of your hip. If you've got a super flexible, you can then go down onto your elbows or right down until your head is touching the ground. But just hang out here for a second. This is a really important one for runners. Okay, we tend to get very stiff around the outsides of our hips. So just think about kind of pushing your groin into the ground. Okay, and then swapping over. So I just start to set up again. So this time my left foot comes forwards, then it goes to the side, then I drop the knee down, and then I slinky my foot back, and I drop my groin towards my heel, and I start to feel that stretch. Okay, just holding that for another 5 seconds. Good stuff. Okay, so just got a couple more to go. This time, putting the leg out directly to the side, and you then start to twist your upper body. Okay, so what we're trying to do is stretch down the inside of your leg into your groin. So you're doing two things. Think about pushing this hip into the ground and then twisting your torso as well. And you should at some point feel a nice stretch down the inside of your leg. So just holding that. I find with this one sometimes, I really feel the stretch, and then at other times I just don't feel it at all. Don't worry, just keep holding it onto the other side, and again, twisting, and try and drop that kind of inside of your leg towards the ground. Okay, good. Right then, so we've just got one last stretch, and this one's a bit of a horrible one. That's why I leave it to the end. Okay, so starting on your knees, take one foot forwards. Okay, there's different variations of this one, so I'll show you a few. If you don't have the greatest mobility, this is just the starting point, and then you start to push your hips forwards like so. Okay, so what we're trying to do is achieve a stretch down the front of this thigh, but kind of at the top of the hip into your what's called your hip flexors. So if you're feeling that, then fantastic. If you're not really getting much of a stretch, there is an alternative, and that's to get into kind of halfway into that position and then try to grab your ankle. The thing with this one is if you're rotating in your hips and your chest, you're not doing it properly, and it's probably best to start with the first one and then just build up to it. But really what we want is your hips facing forwards, your chest facing forwards, and you're grabbing this back foot and you're getting a really nice intense stretch. Remember, this is trying to hit the top of your hip, so if you're just feeling this kind of in the meat of your quad, then you need to push forwards a little bit more. Okay, so the more you push forwards, the more it will get into your hip flexor. Just hold out there for a few more seconds. Okay, and we go on to the other side. So just start off with the initial stretch, pushing that hip forwards until you feel it. If you don't feel that at all, you can start to pick up your back foot. Again, remember, hips need to be straight, everything facing forwards. Okay, good. So there you go, there's your stretch session. Really important to make sure you do this after every single run, primarily because if you're going into your next run session still achy and stiff from the last one because you skipped over your stretches, you're going to see a drop in motivation and then potentially a drop in consistency as you start to skip sessions. So make sure you stretch after every single session, keep yourself nice and loose, keep yourself injury free, which is obviously a primary purpose of stretching. But there you go, well done, and there endeth your session.